There are moments when you sit in a room full of people and feel older than everyone there. Not older in years, older in weight. You notice the tension before anyone says a word. You sense the shift in tone, the way someone's jaw tightens, the way a pause stretches half a second too long. You already know who is upset. You already know why. You already know what might happen next. And without thinking, you adjust. You soften your voice. You choose your words carefully. You become smaller, calmer, easier. No one asks you to. You just do it, because you always have. You were the child who had to understand too much. Before you had the language for it, before you even knew what understanding meant, you were already reading the room, already translating adult moods, already calculating the safest version of yourself. You learned that feelings were not just feelings, they were weather systems, storms that could arrive without warning. So you became a quiet meteorologist. You watched the skies, you studied the wind, you learned how to predict. This is not something children are meant to carry, but you carried it anyway. Some children get to be loud and messy. They get to slam doors and cry without worrying about what it will do to the atmosphere of the house. You did not. You sensed, maybe very early, that the emotional climate around you was fragile. Maybe there was anger that could flare quickly. Maybe there was sadness that hung heavy in the air. Maybe there was silence that felt sharp and tense. You understood that your behavior mattered more than it should, so you became careful. Psychologists call this hypervigilance. It sounds clinical, detached, but in reality, it is simple. It is a nervous system that never fully rests. It is a child who learns that safety depends on awareness. When adults are overwhelmed, inconsistent, or emotionally unavailable, children adapt. They do not blame the adults, they blame themselves, or they quietly adjust. You might have learned to read micro-expressions before you learned long division. You might have known when your parent was about to snap by the way they put their keys on the table. You might have comforted your mother when she cried. You might have mediated fights that were never yours to hold. You became emotionally literate long before you were emotionally supported, and people praised you for it. You're so mature for your age. You're the strong one. You're easy. It sounded like love. It felt like approval. But hidden inside that praise was something else. It meant you were not allowed to be confused, or needy, or loud, or inconvenient. You were the stable one, the understanding one, the one who could handle it. So you did. You learned to regulate yourself because no one else could regulate you. You learned to swallow your reactions because they might make things worse. You learned to anticipate needs before they were spoken. This is called parentification, when a child takes on emotional or practical roles meant for adults. But again, the word is less important than the feeling of being responsible for something that was never yours, the feeling that if you did not stay steady, everything might fall apart. A child's brain is wired for attachment, for connection, for survival through closeness. If closeness feels unstable, the brain adapts. It becomes alert. It becomes strategic. It becomes wise in ways that look impressive on the outside and exhausting on the inside. You did not get to be unaware. You did not get to live only inside your own feelings. You lived inside everyone else's too. You understood why your father was distant. You understood why your mother was overwhelmed. You understood why the tension was there. You understood. And because you understood, you forgave, over and over. But here is the quiet truth. Understanding too much can disconnect you from yourself. When you are always focused on why someone else acts the way they do, you stop asking a simpler question. How does this make me feel? You learn to empathize with everyone except yourself. Now, as an adult, this pattern does not disappear. It evolves. You walk into relationships and instinctively scan for cracks. You sense shifts in tone. You notice delayed replies. You replay conversations in your head. Was that too much? Did I upset them? Are they pulling away? You tell yourself you are just perceptive, and you are. But underneath that perception is a familiar anxiety, the old belief that connection depends on your ability to manage it. You might find yourself drawn to people who need help, people who are complicated, people who are wounded, not because you enjoy chaos, but because it feels familiar. You know how to navigate it. You know how to stay steady while someone else unravels. You know how to be the calm one, the understanding one, the one who doesn't demand too much. You might struggle to express anger, not because you don't feel it, but because anger once felt dangerous. You might explain away other people's hurtful behavior. They're just stressed. They didn't mean it. They had a hard childhood. You understand their history.
You see their wounds. You give them context. But where is the space for your own hurt? When you were small, understanding kept you safe. If you could decode the mood, you could avoid the explosion. If you could anticipate the sadness, you could soften it. If you could stay calm, maybe things wouldn't escalate. Understanding was protection. It was intelligence used for survival. And it worked. You survived. But survival strategies don't always make good companions in adulthood. Now, understanding too much can turn into over-responsibility. You feel guilty for having needs. You feel selfish for wanting reassurance. You hesitate before setting boundaries because you already know how hard it is for the other person. You can see their struggle. You can see their pain. So you minimize your own. There's a quiet loneliness in this. Being the one who always understands means rarely being the one who is understood. You might sit with someone and listen deeply to their story, their fears, their chaos, and when it's your turn to speak, you soften it, you edit it, you make it digestible. You don't want to burden them. You don't want to tip the balance, so you carry more. Again. This is the inner conflict. The very skill that protected you now keeps you from being fully seen. Your empathy is real. It's beautiful. But when it's one-sided, it becomes a form of self-abandonment. You might feel resentment sometimes, a quiet irritation that surprises you. Why am I always the one who has to understand? Why am I always the calm one? Why does no one check on me the way they check on them? And then, almost immediately, you judge yourself for feeling that way. They're trying. They're stressed. You understand. Of course you do. That's what you've always done. But there's a difference between compassion and over-functioning. Compassion says, I see your pain. Over-functioning says, I will manage your pain for you. One is shared. The other is heavy. As a child, you didn't have a choice. Your nervous system chose for you. It learned that hyper-awareness meant safety, that emotional restraint meant stability, that maturity meant love. Now, as an adult, the choice is more subtle. You can still understand. You can still empathize, but you can also begin to notice when you're disappearing. This does not start with confrontation. It starts with awareness, with small, honest questions. What am I feeling right now? What do I need in this moment? Not what they need, not what will keep the peace. You. It might feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. You might feel selfish for even asking, but that discomfort is not proof that you're wrong. It's proof that you're stepping outside an old role. The role of the child who had to be older than their age. The role of the emotional caretaker. The quiet stabilizer. You were never supposed to carry that alone. Children are meant to be held, not to hold everything together. When you begin to see this, something softens. Not anger, not blame, just clarity. You can look back at that younger version of you and feel something tender. Of course you became this way. Of course you learned to read the room. Of course you stayed calm. You were trying to survive. You were trying to keep love. And that deserves compassion. Healing, if we can call it that, does not mean losing your empathy. It does not mean becoming cold or careless. It means widening the circle of your understanding to include yourself. It means allowing your emotions to take up space, even when they complicate things. It means letting someone else misunderstand you sometimes. That might be the hardest part. You're used to being the one who understands. What happens when you're not perfectly attuned? What happens when you say, that hurt me, and leave it there? No long explanation, no minimizing, just the truth. It feels risky, because once honesty might have led to rejection or escalation, but you're not there anymore. You're here, an adult, with more options than you had before. The child who had to understand too much learned to survive by expanding outward. Now you're learning to come inward, slowly, gently. You might still notice everything.